I had been staring at my brother's Facebook profile for almost an hour without realizing it, scrolling up and down the same post while my chest felt tight and my head refused to slow down. It had been a year since he died, and even after all that time, his page still felt like the only place where he existed in some form that hadn't been erased completely. The room was quiet, too quiet for a city apartment at night, and the light from the laptop was the only thing keeping the space from feeling empty. I wasn't looking for anything specific, and I wasn't expecting surprises because his profile had been frozen for months with no changes, no new activity, and no signs of life. Lauren came out the bathroom while drying her hands, stopped when she saw the screen, and let out a slow breath that sounded tired rather than annoyed. She told me I shouldn't keep doing this to myself, that going back there only made things worse. But I answered that it was the anniversary and that I just needed a few more minutes before closing everything. She looked at me for a moment, then asked if I wanted something to eat and said she would go out to get food anyway. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt even quieter, and I finally moved the mouse to close the browser. That was when the page refreshed by itself. A new post appeared at the top of the profile without warning, without loading, and without any explanation that made sense. My eyes locked onto the image before my mind had time to react, and my body immediately pulled back from the desk. The photo showed my brother close to the camera, his face soaked in blood, his eyes wide open and fixed straight ahead as if he had been forced to stare. The blood didn't look staged or edited, and the expression on his face wasn't neutral or empty, because it carried fear and anger mixed together in a way that made my stomach twist. I checked the name, the username, the friends list, and every detail that would confirm it wasn't real, but everything matched his account exactly. Then I noticed the small green dot next to his name that said active now, and my hands started shaking so badly that I had to place them on my legs. Before I could process that, a message notification appeared on the screen. I didn't open it right away because part of me hoped it would disappear if I waited long enough. When it didn't, I clicked, "Brother, please help me, save me." My chair slid back as I stood up too fast, my heart beating hard enough to hurt. I walked to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and told myself that grief could do this, that my head was breaking under pressure. When I went back to the room, the laptop was still on. The profile picture hadn't changed. The image was closer now, and my brother's face filled most of the frame with more blood running down his skin and into his clothes. His eyes looked strained as if he had been staring without blinking for a long time, and the longer I looked, the harder it became to breathe normally. Nothing happened for several seconds, and that waiting felt worse than action because my body stayed tense and ready to react while my mind raced through possibilities. Another message arrived slowly, letter by letter. "It hurts. You left me there." I reached for the power cord and pulled it from the wall with shaking hands, watching the screen go black while my heart continued racing. I stood there holding the cable, listening to the silence, trying to calm down. The laptop turned on by itself. The startup sound felt painfully loud, and the screen lit up without asking for anything, already showing Facebook open on my brother's profile. His face was closer again, distorted and stretched, and a low sound came from the speakers that made my throat tighten. Before anything else happened, I froze in place, watched image shift as if he was moving forward, frame by frame without stopping. His mouth opened, his eyes focused directly on me, and the ground grew louder. I ran to the door and tried to open it, pulling the handle hard while my breath came out uneven and fast. The door didn't move, and the sound behind me became wet and heavy, like something dragging itself forward. When I turned around, my brother's head was already pushing out of the screen, bending the monitor outward as if it were soft. Blood smeared along the edge as his shoulders followed, and his arms reached forward with movements that looked wrong and uncontrolled. Before he fully came out, there was a moment where he stayed half inside the screen, staring at me with a look that mixed anger and pain so strongly that my legs felt weak. Then his body dropped to the floor, and he stood up far too quickly. He crossed the room in seconds and grabbed my arms with a grip that hurt immediately, his fingers digging into my skin while blood soaked through his clothes and onto the carpet. His face was close to mine, and his voice came out loud and raw. "This was your fault. You killed me." He screamed each word directly into my face while shaking me, his grip tightening every time I tried to pull away. I could barely keep my balance, and my arms felt useless under his strength. That's when I heard Lauren yelling from outside the apartment, asking why the door was locked and what was wrong. My brother's expression changed, his grip loosened, and his body jerked as if something was pulling him away. I twisted the handle again, and this time, the door opened. I stumbled forward and grabbed Lauren, holding onto her while my body shook uncontrollably and my breathing refused to slow down. She asked what happened, what I saw, and why my arms were red, but I couldn't explain anything in a way that sounded sane. When I looked back into the apartment, the room was empty, the laptop was off, and there was no sign of blood or damage anywhere. Lauren stayed close to me that night, watching me carefully while I barely slept. The days that followed were heavy and tense, filled with constant fear that something would happen again. Every sound made me flinch, and every notification made my chest tighten. Before the next breakdown, there was no relief, only waiting and exhaustion. I started therapy because I couldn't keep pretending everything was normal. The therapist asked me about my brother, about the accident, about the guilt I tried to avoid talking about. Saying it out loud felt worse than any image or message. I told her I was driving that night, that I was distracted, and that I didn't handle the turn correctly. I admitted that my brother wasn't wearing a seatbelt and that I never insisted, even though I knew better. I explained that the impact threw him forward and there was nothing anyone could do after that. My chest felt tight as I spoke, and my hands shook the entire time. The therapist listened without interrupting and explained that guilt doesn't disappear when it's ignored because it looks for ways to come back stronger. After that session, the messages stopped. I no longer opened my brother's Facebook profile, and I removed everything connected to it from my phone and computer. I think about my brother every day, and that hasn't changed, but the fear has settled into something heavier and quieter. I still don't know what happened that night. I refuse to believe it was all in my head. When he touched me, I realized that it was real. No one will understand me, but what came out of that screen was a message from the dead. The first thing you need to understand is that nothing about me suggested I was the kind of man this would happen to, and that belief is exactly what made everything worse. I worked in an office, a regular job. I didn't think danger came from places like my desk, my apartment, or a casual conversation near the printer. Marla joined the company in early February, a few days before Valentine's Day. She wasn't loud, didn't dress to stand out, and didn't try to force herself into conversations. When she spoke, she did it softly, carefully, like she was always afraid of saying the wrong thing. That made people lower their voices around her, including me. She started talking to me after a few days, usually about work at first, then about small personal things like food she liked or shows she watched. I thought she was very pretty, and I knew she was single. Before asking her out, I told myself not to overthink it, not to assign meaning where there wasn't any, and not to expect anything more than a simple drink after work. Valentine's Day made it feel like a good excuse and actually a romantic idea. When I invited her, she smiled in a way that looked relieved, and she agreed immediately. The bar was close to my apartment, quiet enough to talk without raising our voices. We stayed longer than planned, and the conversation never stalled, which made me relax more than I should have. She laughed easily, asked questions that felt personal without being invasive, and kept telling me how comfortable she felt around me. When the bar closed, I offered her the couch without much thought, mostly because it felt awkward to send her home late. She accepted quickly as if she had already expected the offer. That should have stood out to me, but at the time, it just felt like chemistry. In the morning, I woke up to the sound of movement in my kitchen, which immediately put me on edge because I live alone and I am not used to hearing anyone else in my space. Marla was already dressed, cooking breakfast, moving confidently through my apartment like she knew where everything was. I felt surprised and slightly uncomfortable, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want to seem ungrateful or rude. She left later that day, kissed my cheek casually, and said she would text me. I watched her walk away and told myself it had just been a good date, nothing more. That weekend I went out with friends like I used to, but I kept thinking about how fast everything had happened, even though I didn't fully admit it to myself. I tried to convince myself that I was just nervous because it had been a while since I dated anyone seriously. When I got home late that night and unlocked my door, I immediately knew something was wrong because the lights were on and the TV was playing, even though I was certain I had turned everything off before leaving. My body reacted before my mind did, and I froze in the doorway listening. Marla was sitting on my couch wearing comfortable clothes, watching television like it was the most natural thing in the world. When I asked how she got inside, my voice came out tighter than I expected, and she responded calmly saying she had made a copy of my key earlier, asking if that was okay like it was a small favor. I felt very confused and somewhat nervous. I told her that was too much, that we were moving too fast and that she should have asked me first. She nodded, apologized softly, and then asked what I wanted for dinner, completely ignoring the fact that I was visibly shaken. She stayed the entire weekend. Every time I tried to bring up the conversation again, she redirected it, smiled, or acted hurt enough to make me back off. I started feeling trapped inside my own apartment, sleeping lightly, locking my bedroom door at night, and listening for movement. By Monday, I was exhausted, anxious, and desperate for distance, believing that work would create a barrier she couldn't cross. That illusion shattered the moment I saw her at the office, standing confidently among coworkers, laughing and touching people's arms while telling stories. When I approached the group, the mood shifted immediately, and several coworkers congratulated me, mentioning how happy they were for us. My confusion turned into dread when Marla casually said we were a couple and that we were planning a future together. She spoke about marriage like it was a scheduled task, saying she was just waiting for me to propose and that she trusted I would do it soon. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my hands started shaking in a way I couldn't control. I asked her to talk after work, barely holding myself together for the rest of the day. Outside, I finally said everything I had been holding back, explaining that we were not together, that I never agreed to any of this, and that she needed to return the key and leave me alone. Her reaction was immediate and intense. Her face hardened, her breathing became shallow, and her voice dropped when she told me I was humiliating her. After that, she stopped speaking to me entirely, and the silence felt heavier rather than relieving. Weeks passed with no interaction, and I slowly began to relax, thinking the situation had resolved itself. But the worst was yet to come. It all started on one of our coworkers' birthdays. I attended, confident that Marla wouldn't be there. She had been very isolated in recent weeks and didn't even have a relationship with the birthday guy. We heard a scream echo through the room, sharp enough to silence everyone. Marla stood outside the bathroom, shaking, crying, barely able to speak, saying one of our coworkers had attacked her and that she defended herself. Inside, the man lay unconscious on the floor. The room filled with panic, shouting, and fear, and people immediately surrounded her, offering comfort and support. I felt guilt rise in my chest, thinking that maybe my rejection had pushed her into something traumatic. That thought ate at me, and I started checking on her, walking her home and staying close, believing I was helping someone fragile. Without asking, she moved back into my apartment. This time, she didn't even pretend it was temporary. She was cheerful, energetic, and disturbingly unaffected by what had happened. The man was hospitalized, unconscious, and she talked about it like it was already behind her. The disconnect terrified me. I slept less, avoided being alone with her when possible, and started feeling watched even when she wasn't in the room. One day, 2 police officers knocked on my door. They were asking for Marla by name. They explained everything carefully, telling me that the hospitalized man had woken up, spoken to them, and denied every accusation. The security footage confirmed his story. showing Marla following him, drugging his drink, and attacking him. As they spoke, Marla appeared behind me, calm and smiling as if this was just another inconvenience. When they arrested her, she didn't struggle. She looked at me and said, "Love required commitment, and commitment required action." I felt sick, dizzy, and ashamed, realizing how close I had come to being the next person she framed or harmed. Valentine's Day still arrives every year, but now it feels like a warning rather than a celebration. I learned that danger doesn't always come loudly or violently at first. Sometimes it comes quietly, smiling, and already holding a copy of your key. The first time I realized something was wrong, I was already staring at the screen and couldn't look away. That moment didn't feel exciting or mysterious. It felt heavy, like my body understood something my head refused to accept. I had always been curious about things people warned others not to touch. Not because I felt special, but because I hated not knowing. If something existed, I needed proof. That habit followed me into adulthood, especially during nights when I stayed awake watching YouTube videos about obscure parts of the internet. I didn't talk about it with my friends or family. Those videos became something private, something I watched with headphones on, replaying details and comments. The deep web wasn't presented as fantasy there, but as structure, a system that rewarded patience and obsession. What caught my attention the most was red rooms. Not because of the violence, but because nobody could prove they were real. I didn't want horror. I wanted confirmation. I started slowly using basic tools that anyone could find with enough searching. Most nights ended the same way, with blank pages and dead links that led nowhere. That didn't frustrate me because it matched what the videos explained. Real things were hidden behind repetition and time. I found black markets, forums, and video directories that felt wrong but unimpressive. Everything looked transactional and cold. I never interacted with anyone. I stayed invisible, just observing, telling myself that was enough. Red rooms never appeared. Weeks passed without a trace, and part of me started thinking they were just another myth recycled for views. Still, I kept searching, night after night, following the same routine. Then one night, a red room appeared at the top of an empty page. It didn't load or animate. Before clicking anything, I sat back and tried to calm my breathing because my body reacted faster than my thoughts. My heart wasn't racing, but there was pressure in my chest that didn't fade. I checked the room, the door, the window, even though it made no sense. The red room asked a simple question about entering. No explanation followed, and that made it worse. I clicked yes, expecting something dramatic, but the same question appeared again, identical in every way. I hesitated, then clicked yes once more. The repetition started to bother me, not because it felt fake, but because it felt deliberate. Every time I answered, the page refreshed instantly, as if someone was waiting for that response. I told myself I could stop any time, but I didn't. When the room finally disappeared, nothing replaced it. No loading screen, no confirmation. I waited, staring at the screen until my eyes hurt, then shut the laptop and went to bed without sleeping. The next evening, when someone knocked on my door, I didn't know if it was influenced by my experience yesterday, but I was a little worried. I stayed quiet for several seconds, standing close enough to hear movement outside. A voice said my name and mentioned a delivery. It sounded normal, but my hands tightened around the door handle anyway. The moment I opened the door, everything collapsed into chaos. Hands grabbed my arms with force that didn't allow resistance. Another hand covered my mouth hard enough to hurt my jaw. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. They moved fast and efficiently, like they had done this before. A hood went over my head and something solid pressed against my face, cutting off air. My wrists were pulled behind my back and secured tightly, making my shoulders burn. I was dragged into a vehicle and pushed down onto the seat. Someone kept pressure on my head while the car started moving. No one spoke, and the silence made it worse than threats ever could. I lost track of time as the car sped through turns. Breathing became harder, slower, until everything faded out. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the position of my body, because I couldn't move. My wrists were tied to a chair, my ankles secured, my back forced straight. Panic didn't explode immediately. It built slowly as I tested every restraint and failed. Bright lights blinded me, aimed directly at my face. I tried to look away, but my head was pulled back roughly by someone standing behind me. My vision adjusted enough to see cameras placed around the room, all pointed at me. A screen turned on in front of me, filling with usernames and numbers that kept changing. I understood what it was before my mind could deny it. This wasn't a video archive. It was live. Men moved in and out of my view, faces covered, gestures calm and methodical. One of them adjusted a camera. Another checked the screen, nodding slowly. Requests appeared on the screen, and they followed them carefully, step by step, making sure everything was visible. They waited after each action, watching reactions, adjusting angles, continuing without hesitation. My body reacted before my voice did. I cried, begged, tried to explain anything that could make this stop. Nothing changed. This wasn't punishment or revenge. It was scheduled. I couldn't believe what I was experiencing. My curiosity about red rooms led me to this place as the protagonist. I just wanted to observe, but now I am the object. They began using devices meant to control pain precisely, not to end anything quickly. One of them placed clamps on my arms and legs, tightening them until my muscles locked and my hands lost strength. Another adjusted the chair again so my feet barely touched the floor, forcing my weight onto my shoulders and lower back. Every time my body tried to shift or resist, they corrected it immediately, tightening something else, pushing me back into position so the cameras never lost sight of my face. And after that, they focused on keeping me responsive. They poured cold water over my head without warning, then left me sitting there shaking while the light stayed fixed on my eyes. When my breathing slowed, one of them struck my leg hard enough to make my body jerk, not once, but repeatedly, waiting between each hit to make sure I stayed awake. The last thing I remember clearly was my vision narrowing as the lights stayed fixed on me. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. My body felt heavy and unresponsive, and my thoughts refused to connect properly. The environment was different, quieter, but I couldn't open my eyes immediately. A voice called my name, repeating it slowly until it broke through the fog in my head. When I finally managed to focus, I saw white walls and medical equipment around me. My throat hurt when I tried to speak, and my hands were free but weak. Someone pressed a button and left the room without explaining anything. I stayed there staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what was real and what wasn't. But my thoughts kept circling back to the cameras. My mother was sitting next to the bed when I fully woke up. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. When she saw my eyes open, she held my hand tightly and didn't say anything at first. I told her everything in a rush, afraid that if I stopped talking, the memories would slip away. I described the website, the red room, the men, the room, the broadcast. I needed her to believe me. She listened calmly, then told me this wasn't the first time I had told that story. According to her, I had never lived alone, never owned a computer, and had no access to the internet. She said I had been hospitalized before after obsessing over crime cases, always convinced I had been taken somewhere. The doctors called it a recurring episode. I stopped arguing and looked away. I listened to my mother, but I didn't accept what she was saying. After she left the room, I tested my hands, my wrists, my arms, slowly checking everything. I no longer had any wounds, but I am sure that they did not all disappear. I tried to remember everything that happened in the red room, although everything is in fragments. They erased my memory. I'm sure they'll come for me again. I was just another man scrolling through Tinder at night, sitting alone in my apartment killing time because sleep never came easily anymore. My life was simple and predictable. I worked, came home, and filled the silence with my phone. Tinder wasn't hope or romance for me. It was distraction. something that made the hours pass faster when the walls felt too close. That's when I matched with Marla. Her profile stood out without trying too hard. Natural photos, no forced poses, and always the same small dog in her arms. She looked warm, relaxed, and confident in a way that felt real instead of staged. She messaged first, and the conversation flowed without effort. She laughed easily, asked real questions, and complimented me in a way that didn't feel fake. I kept waiting for the moment where it would turn awkward or cold, but it never did. By the end of the night, she suggested meeting in person. We agreed to meet up at a cafe close to her place. Nothing special, just a simple date. I agreed immediately, telling myself that sometimes things just work out. I arrived early to the cafe and spent several minutes pretending to check my phone while watching the door. When Marla walked in, there was no confusion or disappointment. She looked exactly like her photos, but more alive, more present, with a smile that felt directed only at me. She spoke with energy, leaned toward me while I talked, and paid attention in a way that made me feel seen. She touched my arm lightly once, just enough to make my chest tighten. I didn't understand why someone like her was sitting across from me, but I didn't question it. After one drink, she suggested leaving the cafe. She said her place was nearby and quieter. There was no hesitation in her voice, no playful pause. I nodded, trying to act calm while my heart beat too fast. Her apartment was clean and oddly empty, with no photos and no personal details. The music played softly while she poured drinks. We sat close on the couch, and when she kissed me, I didn't stop her. Before anything truly happened, I felt something slip. My focus faded, my reactions slowed, and my body stopped responding the way it should have. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form properly. The fear didn't hit immediately. At first, it was confusion mixed with embarrassment, like my body was failing me at the worst possible moment. My head felt heavy, my arms weak, and my vision blurred in and out as I struggled to stay upright. I tried to push myself off the couch, but my legs didn't cooperate. My mouth opened, yet the sound that came out was barely a whisper. Marla watched me with patience, her face calm, her posture relaxed, as if this was unfolding exactly as planned. When I woke up, my wrists and ankles were tied tightly to a bed frame. The cords cut into my skin when I moved, and the room around me was unfamiliar and windowless. Panic rose fast, filling my chest until breathing became difficult. I pulled against the restraints, my muscles shaking from effort and fear, while my thoughts raced without direction. I tried to scream again, but my throat felt raw and dry, producing only broken sounds. The door opened slowly, and Marla stepped inside. A man followed her, his head covered with a dark cloth. The door closed behind them with a final sound that made my stomach drop. Before they touched me, they waited. That waiting felt deliberate, like they wanted me fully awake and aware of what was coming. My breathing grew louder, uneven, and impossible to control as my eyes moved between them. The man approached first and grabbed my arm with firm pressure. He pressed a heavy object against my skin and increased the force slowly. Pain spread deep through my arm, sharp enough to force a scream out of me as my body jerked against the restraints. Marla watched closely, her eyes focused, her mouth relaxed. She didn't flinch when I begged or when my voice broke. She nodded once, and the man moved to my legs, repeating the same action until my muscles cramped violently. I cried openly, my face wet, my voice cracking as I asked why this was happening. I told them they had the wrong person, that I didn't know them, that I would do anything to make it stop. Marla laughed softly, not out of humor, but out of satisfaction. She stepped closer and looked directly into my face. You really don't remember? I swear I don't know you. You remember what you chose to forget. She spoke about the dog, the small white dog, the night I hit it with my car and drove away without stopping. The memory came back with brutal clarity, tightening my chest until it hurt to breathe. I didn't interrupt her. I couldn't. My body shook uncontrollably, not just from pain, but from understanding exactly why I was there. She explained how she found me using cameras, license plates, and weeks of watching my routine. She talked about patience, about planning, and about knowing that someone like me would eventually look for connection online. I knew you would swipe. You always do. The man returned to the bed and twisted my fingers one by one, slow enough to make each movement count. The pain forced screams out of me that I couldn't control, my body arching uselessly against the restraints. I begged again, apologizing repeatedly, promising anything I could think of. My words overlapped and tangled, sounding desperate and weak even to my own ears. Marla leaned close enough that I could feel her breathe. You didn't stop. You didn't look back. They left me there afterward, alone, shaking and exhausted, my body aching everywhere they had touched. When Marla returned, she cut the ropes without ceremony. She didn't apologize or threaten me. She simply told me to get dressed and leave. I failed trying to stand, my legs barely holding me upright. She watched without helping as I struggled toward the door. The hallway outside was empty, cold, and smelled old, like no one truly lived there. Days later, I realized the apartment wasn't hers. The building was abandoned. The Tinder profile disappeared. The phone number stopped working. There was nothing to trace. I thought about reporting everything, but every time I tried to speak, the image of that dog came back, lying broken on the street while I drove away. I deleted Tinder and stopped looking for company online. I avoid driving at night whenever possible, and sudden sounds still make my chest tighten. I don't think of Marla every day, but I never forget her. I don't believe she wanted to kill me. She wanted me to carry it with me, and I deserved it.
My friend Hannah and I decided to celebrate a different kind of Valentine's Day, honoring our friendship without thinking about our broken hearts. It was just a simple girls' night out. But our lives changed completely. Hannah and I have known each other since we were little girls. She was the perfect date. I packed a backpack with cheap wine, snacks, and pajamas and went to Hannah's house because neither of us wanted to be alone that night. We were both recently separated, but that wasn't going to stop us from enjoying the day. The plan was simple. Stay inside, watch movies, and let the night pass without making it a big deal. Couples had already disappeared into their plans, and the street felt empty earlier than usual. We put on a movie, opened the wine, and tried to relax. Half an hour later, we realized we forgot most of the snacks. We laughed it off, grabbed our jackets, and went out, telling ourselves it would only take a few minutes. The walk back from the store should have been forgettable, but something about it stuck with me later. The street was almost silent, until we heard footsteps behind us, close enough to notice, slow enough to make us turn around. It was Ethan, Hannah's neighbor. I recognized him immediately because he always looked like someone trying not to be seen. He smiled too wide when he saw us and asked how we were doing, then asked if we were planning to spend the night alone. The question came out casual, but his eyes stayed fixed on Hannah. He started talking without stopping, explaining that his wife had left him for another man, saying it like a joke, even though his hands kept shaking. He said nights like Valentine's Day made everything worse and that people never understood what betrayal really felt like. Hannah nodded politely and tried to unlock the door while he talked. We told him we were sorry and said we were tired. He finally stepped back, waved, and walked toward his house. We locked the door behind us and stood there for a second longer than necessary. Hannah said he was strange, then shrugged it off, and we went back to the living room. Nothing else happened for a while. Then, a sound came from outside late at night, after the second movie had already started and the wine was almost gone. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to pull my attention away from the screen. Hannah muted the TV, and we both listened without speaking, trying to decide if it was worth reacting. There was a long pause where the house felt exposed, like every wall was thinner than it should have been. I told myself it was probably nothing and stood up, because neither of us wanted to admit we were scared already. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole, seeing only darkness and the empty porch. When I opened the door, Ethan rushed forward so fast I didn't even have time to react. He slammed into the door with his shoulder, forcing his way inside and knocking me backward. The door closed behind him, and the lock clicked before I could even think about running. He had a gun in his hand, and his face looked completely different from earlier. He started yelling immediately, demanding to know where Hannah's ex was, shouting his name over and over. Hannah kept saying he doesn't live there anymore, her voice shaking as she tried to back away. Ethan stepped closer, waving the gun and screaming that he knew the truth, that everyone was lying to him. He accused Hannah's ex of stealing his wife and ruining his life, and he would not listen when she said he wasn't there. He pointed the gun at us and told us to move, and we obeyed because there was nothing else we could do. He forced us down the hallway and into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind us. He kept pacing while asking the same questions again and again. Hannah lied and said her ex was coming back soon, hoping it would calm him or buy time, but it only made him angrier. Before touching us, he stood there staring, like he was deciding something. That silence was worse than the shouting, because neither of us knew what would happen next. Then he told us to sit on the bed and not look at him. He ordered us to take off our clothes until we were in our underwear, and we did it slowly, shaking so badly it was hard to move. He tied our hands with something thin and rough that burned into our skin, then took out his phone and started filming, laughing and telling us to say his name. He hit Hannah first, then turned to me, moving with intention instead of panic. Every strike felt planned, like he wanted us to remember it. He kept yelling that nobody disrespected him, and that this was what happened to people who took things from him. When he pulled out the lighter, Hannah started crying louder, begging him to stop. He didn't listen. He burned us in short bursts, watching our reactions and laughing like it entertained him. There was a moment when Hannah managed to free one hand, and I saw hope flash across her face before fear took over. She grabbed a heavy vase from the dresser and swung it at him, hitting his shoulder instead of his head. Ethan reacted instantly, grabbing her hair and throwing her to the floor. The gun slid away, but he didn't even look at it. He picked up a thick wooden rod from the corner of the room and raised it without hesitation. He hit her again and again, his face empty, his movements slow and deliberate. Hannah screamed at first, then stopped responding, and he kept going even after her body went still. I covered my face and pressed myself against the wall, unable to move, unable to look away from the sound. When he finally stopped, he stood there breathing hard, then turned to me without emotion. He lit a blanket on fire and threw it onto the floor, watching the flames grow. He locked the door from the outside and walked away, leaving us inside as the fire spread. Smoke filled the room quickly, burning my throat and eyes. My wrists hurt so badly I could barely think, but panic forced me to move. I crawled across the floor to Hannah, touching her face, and realizing she was gone. I worked the ties against the broken bed frame until they snapped, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control them. The flames climbed the walls and the heat pressed in from every direction. I smashed the window with the wooden rod, cutting myself as I climbed out. I ran barefoot into the street, screaming for help, until lights turned on and doors opened. Police and fire trucks arrived in minutes, and Ethan was arrested that same night. He was sentenced to life in prison. Hannah died in that room. The house burned down completely. Valentine's Day passed like it never existed. The first thing you need to understand is that I wasn't distracted, drunk, or half asleep that night, because I know people like to assume that when something bad happens. I was fully awake, tired from work, yes, but aware of when I was and what time it was. It was late, close to 11, and I was taking the subway home like I'd done hundreds of times before. I work downtown, long hours, nothing exciting, and the subway is part of my routine, whether I like it or not. The line I take has a reputation, and everyone in New York knows it. People talk about it being strange, about seeing things that don't quite fit. But after a while, you stop listening. You normalize behavior that shouldn't feel normal. That night I got on the train, found a seat and leaned back, already thinking about getting home and taking off my shoes. The car was half full, quiet in that uncomfortable way where everyone avoids looking at each other too much. Nothing stood out at first, and that is what makes what happened harder to explain. I sat there for maybe a minute before I felt that uncomfortable pressure in my chest that tells you someone is watching you. Not casually, not by accident, but with intention. Across from me sat an older woman wearing a long dark coat, even though it wasn't that cold. Her posture was stiff and unnatural, like she was holding herself in place. She was staring straight at me. I mean directly at my face, without blinking or shifting her eyes, even once. Next to her sat a man, around my age, maybe a little older, slouched forward with his hands clasped between his knees. He never looked up, not when the train moved, not when people got on or off. He looked tense, like his body was working hard to stay still. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, because people stare on the subway and sometimes they're just weird. Still, every time I looked back at the woman, her eyes were exactly where I left them. Her mouth stayed slightly open, and her breathing, if she was breathing, was impossible to notice. I stood up and moved closer to the door, pretending I was getting ready for my stop, even though it was still several stations away. My heart was already beating too fast, and I hated that I could feel it in my throat. At the next stop, a man got on and stood near the pole in front of me, and the moment his eyes locked onto mine, I knew something was very wrong. Before anything physical happened, there was a long stretch of silence that made my skin crawl. The doors closed, the train started moving again, and the standing man didn't look away, even once. His expression was serious, focused, like he was counting something in his head. I glanced back at the woman and she leaned forward just slightly, enough to confirm she was still watching me. My hands tightened around my bag and I scanned the car looking for anyone paying attention, but everyone seemed trapped in their own world. The standing man stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, and my body reacted before my brain could catch up. I shifted sideways, trying to put distance between us, but the train slowed, and that is when he grabbed me. His grip was strong and sudden, fingers digging into my arm through my coat. I shouted and tried to twist free, my bag slipping off my shoulders as the doors opened. People stared, but no one moved. Dragged me out onto the platform, and I managed to wrench my arm free by slamming my elbow backward. I didn't wait to see his reaction. I ran, shoes slipped slightly on the concrete as the train door slammed shut behind me. I took the stairs, stopping, my lungs burning, my legs shaking as I burst out onto the street. The night air felt cold and sharp, and the city suddenly felt empty, like I had stepped into the wrong version of it. I ran without direction, turning corners at random, driven by pure panic and the sound of footsteps that I could not always hear, but felt were there. My thoughts were scattered, jumping from escape routes to worst outcomes, and I could barely keep track of where I was. I turned into a narrow passage between two buildings without thinking, only realizing my mistake when the space closed in, and there was no way forward. I stopped, breath ragged, and turned around just as the man from the subway stepped into the entrance. He raised his hands slowly, his face tense but not angry, and spoke in a low, controlled voice. "Calm down. I'm not going to hurt you." I pressed myself against the wall, my legs weak, my voice shaking as I told him to stay back. I begged him to leave me alone, to let me go, because I didn't understand what was happening. I pulled you out because you were in danger. That woman on the train was dead. His words didn't make sense at first, and I told him that, my voice breaking as fear turned into confusion. He took a careful step closer and explained that he worked at a morgue and knew what dead skin looked like, knew when a body was being held up instead of standing on its own. The man next to her was holding her. He was waiting for the right stop, and you caught his attention. I stood there, frozen, just overwhelmed and desperate to survive. I asked him why he didn't warn me instead of dragging me, and he said there was no time, that people freeze when they are warned. I wanted to believe him, because believing him meant I wasn't alone anymore. I thanked him, my hands still shaking, and told him I needed to get somewhere safe. He stepped aside and motioned toward the street. Go now. Do not stop. I walked past him slowly, every muscle tight, and when I stepped back onto the sidewalk, I saw the man from the subway standing under a streetlight, smiling directly at me. That is when I ran again. The man chased me, his footsteps fast and steady behind mine, and panic pushed my body beyond what I thought it could handle. I crossed streets without looking, barely avoided cars, and felt my legs screaming in protest as I forced them to keep moving. I ducked into an apartment lobby and slammed the door shut, pressing my weight against the glass as he hit it hard with his shoulder. For a moment, I thought it would break, but then he stopped. Behind him stood the man who claimed he saved me, watching quietly, and the look they exchanged told me everything I needed to know. I ran deeper into the building, found another exit, and didn't stop until I reached a crowded avenue filled with noise and people. I stayed there until my body finally gave out, shaking uncontrollably among strangers. Nothing was reported the next day, which somehow made everything worse. I changed my routines, my routes, and my habits, but I never regained the sense of safety I had before. That night taught me that sometimes the danger is not loud or obvious, and sometimes the people who claim to save you are only waiting for a better moment.
I didn't open Facebook looking for trouble. I opened it because I needed work. I was sitting at my desk early in the morning, half awake, scrolling through job groups, reading posts that all sounded the same, when I saw a group that made no sense in that context. It wasn't related to work, freelancing, or hiring. It had a ridiculous profile picture of a grown man wearing party glasses and a cheap hat, smiling in a way that felt forced even through a small image. The group name said, Fans of John Smith. No description, no rules, nothing else. What stopped me wasn't the name because it was generic, but the number of members. More than 700 people. That didn't match the joke at all. I stared at it longer than I should have, feeling slightly uncomfortable but also curious in a silly, harmless way. I wanted to understand why so many people were part of something that looked pointless. I clicked the group, expecting to laugh and close it immediately. The page took longer than usual to load, which made me impatient at first. But when it finally appeared, my attention locked in place. Every single member had the same face as their profile picture. It was the same man from the group photo, wearing the same glasses and hat, staring directly at the camera. Some profiles had small differences. A scarf, different glasses, a hat tilted slightly to one side, but the expression never changed. It wasn't edited badly or filtered. It looked real, which made the repetition disturbing instead of funny. The group feed was worse. There were no text posts, no jokes, no explanations. Just photos of that man, taken in different places and angles. Each post had dozens of comments, sometimes more than 100, and every comment came from the same face again. These were not empty or inactive profiles. They posted daily, commented on each other, and interacted constantly. I clicked several profiles, trying to find a mistake, a crack, something that explained the pattern. They had friends, tagged photos, likes, and normal activity mixed with more images of that man. Different names, different locations, same face. It felt coordinated in a way I couldn't explain. I closed the group after a few minutes, telling myself it was some kind of performance or online joke taken too far. I went back to job searching, forcing my focus elsewhere, convinced that once the tab was closed, the whole thing would stop existing for me. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification, and my body reacted before my brain did. My chest tightened and my hand hesitated before unlocking the screen, because part of me already knew what I was going to see. It was a friend request from a profile with that same face, same glasses, same hat, different name. I checked the profile carefully, scrolling slowly, trying to calm myself by analyzing details, but everything looked real and active. I hadn't joined the group, commented, or reacted to anything, so I couldn't understand how they found me. I didn't accept or decline the request. I closed the app and placed the phone face down on the table, telling myself that ignoring it was the smartest option. 10 minutes later, another notification appeared. Another request. Same face, different name again. Before the third notification arrived, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I opened Facebook again, trying to stay calm, and saw that the first profile had sent me a message. It wasn't text. It was an image. The man's face filled the screen, closer than before, staring straight ahead without any background. I didn't respond. I closed the app, but the notifications didn't stop. Over the next hour, my phone filled with requests, one after another, until there were more than 100 waiting. Blocking them barely helped, because new ones kept appearing faster than I could react. Before doing anything else, I logged out of my account, uninstalled the app, and shut my phone down completely. My hands were shaking and my breathing was uneven, because this no longer felt like an online prank. It felt organized, deliberate, and directed at me. 3 days passed without any new notifications, which helped me convince myself that stepping away had worked. I needed food and I needed to feel normal again, so I left my phone at home and went to the grocery store, telling myself that real life had nothing to do with what happened online. I walked through the aisles slowly, focusing on small decisions like choosing brands and checking prices, trying to ground myself in ordinary actions. That sense of control disappeared the moment I noticed someone standing still at the end of the aisle. It was him. Same man, same glasses, same hat. He wasn't holding a basket or a cart, and he wasn't pretending to shop. He was, just standing there, watching me without blinking, his expression flat and empty. My heart started racing and my legs felt weak, but I forced myself to turn away and move faster toward the exit because panic would only make things worse. I dropped my basket by accident, heard it hit the floor, and didn't stop to pick it up. I ran past people and pushed through the automatic doors. Outside, I looked back once and saw him still inside the store, standing in the same place, as if he hadn't moved at all. I didn't wait to see more. I went straight home, checking every reflection along the way, feeling exposed and watched. When my building came into view, my chest tightened again, because he was already there. He stood across the street, facing the entrance, staring directly at me without moving. I fumbled with my keys, got inside, and locked the door behind me as fast as I could. From my window, I looked down and saw that he wasn't alone anymore. There were at least 10 men standing on the sidewalk, all identical, all facing my building, all completely silent. None of them looked around or spoke to each other. They just waited. Before anything else happened, I grabbed my phone and called the police, struggling to explain what I was seeing without sounding insane. When they arrived, the street was empty. All men vanished. Nothing that supported my story. That night, I barely slept. When I woke up in the middle of the night, pressure on my arms held me down. 5 men stood around my bed, moving quickly and confidently, tying my wrists and ankles while another pressed a hand over my mouth. They dressed me like them, placed the hat on my head, adjusted the glasses on my face, and took photos with bright flashes that burned my eyes. You belong now. You are one of us. Then they left. Morning came, but nothing felt normal again. My phone, laptop, and documents were gone, and every attempt to access my accounts failed. It was as if my digital presence had been erased completely, leaving behind a version of me I didn't recognize. I never saw those men again, but the damage was done. I moved months later, changed numbers, and avoided social media as much as possible, knowing that whatever they wanted from me had already been taken. Last week, my younger brother laughed while showing me his phone during dinner. He found a weird Facebook group. All the members looked the same, like a funny guy with glasses. I didn't ask to see it. I didn't need to.
If you are watching this on Valentine's Day, stop for a second, because this story starts in a normal place and ends in a way that still keeps me awake at night. That day I was walking with my dog in the same park near my apartment like every morning. While my dog pulled the leash near the fountain, I heard my name spoken clearly behind me, and the sound made my shoulders tense before I even turned around. When I faced the voice, I saw a woman standing there with a calm smile that did not move when she noticed my reaction. It took me several seconds to recognize her, because my brain resisted the idea before accepting it. Her name was Lena, and we had not seen each other since we were teenagers, back when promises were easy and consequences felt unreal. We started talking in an awkward way, filling the silence with safe questions that avoided anything important, and I noticed quickly that she answered too fast, like she had rehearsed every possible version of this conversation. I also noticed that she watched me closely while answering, like she was checking if I matched an image she had kept for years. She told me she knew I lived nearby and that she had seen me walking my dog before, which made me uncomfortable even though I tried not to show it. When I asked how long she had been back in town, she said she returned recently and waited for the right moment to see me, and the way she said it made my chest tighten even though her tone stayed soft. I knew I would run into you eventually. You live close. It was only a matter of time. I tried to laugh it off, but she watched my face closely, like she was checking my reaction. When we said goodbye, she called my name again, and when I turned, her expression changed slightly. I didn't forget the promise. I'm back. I smiled out of reflex, nodded, and walked away faster than usual, already trying to convince myself that it meant nothing. Valentine's Day arrived a few days later, and I tried not to think about Lena even though the memory of her words kept coming back when I was alone. That morning, a knock on my door interrupted my routine, and before opening it, I stood still, listening, feeling my heart beat harder than it should. When I opened the door, she was there, standing straight and calm, looking at me like she belonged in that space. I asked how she found my address, and she avoided the question without changing her expression. She reminded me of something we said when we were 15, about a silly promise when we were teens. We promised each other that if we weren't married to other people by the time we turned 30, we would marry each other. And here I am. I waited 15 years for this moment. Hearing it out loud made my skin crawl because it sounded serious in her mouth. I told her it was a childish joke and explained that I had a girlfriend, trying to keep my voice steady. Her reaction was immediate and overwhelming, as she started crying loudly and accused me of betraying her, stepping closer until I had to block her with my arms. I warned her to leave and said I would call the police if she did not calm down. "You lied to me! You chose someone else!" She stopped crying suddenly, wiped her face, and told me I was making a mistake, adding that we would be together forever, either alone or with no one else. Then she walked away, leaving me shaking in my doorway. "You will regret this." I almost canceled my Valentine's dinner that night, but I convinced myself that fear was not a reason to change plans, even though my hands were shaking while I grabbed my keys. I texted my girlfriend Rachel to tell her I was on my way, and she replied that I should meet her at the restaurant instead to keep the surprise. At the restaurant, time passed too slowly, and every minute without a response made my thoughts darker and harder to control. I called her phone again and again, listening to it ring until my throat felt tight. When someone sat across from me, I looked up ready to complain, but the face in front of me froze me in place. She had Rachel's hair, Rachel's clothes, and Rachel's posture, but her eyes were wrong, focused, and excited. "You look tense. Valentine's Day does that to people." Lena smiled and leaned closer, and my body reacted before my mind as fear ran through me and made it hard to breathe. My hands trembled as I told her to stop and demanded to know where Rachel was, but she laughed openly, enjoying the attention and the confusion around us. People stared while she acted calm and affectionate, touching my hand and calling me by my girlfriend's name. Security approached when I raised my voice and I tried to explain that she was pretending, that something was wrong, but Lena started crying again, playing the role perfectly. We were asked to leave, and outside she followed me, still talking about destiny and promises. "You should not have rejected me. This could have been easy. We are meant to be together, but I fixed the problem." Those last words made me feel desperate. I ran to my car and drove to Rachel's apartment as fast as traffic allowed, calling her nonstop while my fear turned into panic. When I reached her place, the door was unlocked. Inside the bedroom, I found her on the floor, tied, shaved, and lifeless, and my legs almost gave out as I realized she was gone. The walls were decorated with her hair placed carefully, like trophies. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Lena standing in the doorway, holding a bag and smiling with satisfaction. She told me she removed the obstacle and that now we could finally be together. When she reached for me, I stepped back and tripped, and when she grabbed my arm, I reacted without thinking, kicking her knee and pushing her away. She fell hard and hit her head, screaming my name. I ran out of the apartment and drove straight to the police station, barely able to speak, barely able to breathe, but desperate to get away from her. Lena was arrested that night, and they later confirmed that she had planned everything for years, watching, waiting, and preparing. Rachel was buried a week later, and I still visit her grave, even though it hurts every time.
The last normal thing I remember is helping my neighbor carry boxes of canned food into the community center while she laughed because one of them broke and spilled everywhere. That image keeps coming back, not because it was important, but because it proves there was a before. My name doesn't matter much. I lived alone on Alder Street, worked nights, slept during the day, and stayed out of trouble. The block was quiet, predictable, and mostly invisible to the rest of the city. That kind of place where nothing big ever happened, and people liked it that way. Claudia lived 2 houses down from me. She was younger than most of us on the block and impossible to ignore. She trained circus acts in her yard, practiced with ropes and balance gear, and turned every free space into something useful. She organized food drives, art events, and activities for kids who had nowhere else to go. I helped her often. I drove donations, fixed broken things, and stood guard when she practiced dangerous routines. It wasn't friendship in the deep sense, but there was trust, and that mattered more than small talk. The first sign that something was wrong was how suddenly she disappeared from everything. One day, she was everywhere, and the next day, she was nowhere. No texts, no calls, no notes, nothing. At first, I tried to be reasonable about it. People leave town, people change plans. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, even though that didn't sit right with what I knew about her. Days passed, and her house stayed untouched. No lights at night, no noise, no movement behind the curtains. Her mailbox filled up, and flyers she had posted stayed where they were, slowly peeling from the walls. The tension built slowly, not as panic, but as constant awareness. Every time I walked past her place, I looked longer than I should have. Every time I heard a noise, I checked the street. When the police finally showed up, the tone of everything shifted. They knocked on doors and asked questions without urgency. When I spoke to one officer, he told me Claudia had been reported missing 15 days earlier by her family. They said there were no signs of forced entry and no immediate suspects. Because of that, they were leaning toward calling it a voluntary disappearance. I felt my stomach drop when he said it because I knew she would never leave without telling someone. A few days after the police visit, something changed that made the street feel unsafe in a way I couldn't explain to anyone else. That afternoon, I stood by my window longer than usual, watching Claudia's house, waiting for something to happen. The waiting itself was exhausting. My body felt tight, like I was bracing for impact without knowing from where. Cars passed, people walked by, and nothing broke the pattern. Then the vans arrived. 2 dark vans pulled up in front of Claudia's house just before sunset. 6 people got out, all adults, all wearing full costumes that covered their faces and bodies. These weren't playful outfits or cheap masks. They were detailed, worn, and disturbing. One wore a fox head with cracked paint. Another had a bird mask with long beak-like features. One was wrapped in fabric strips that hid their shape completely. The last one stepped out slowly, wearing a Mickey Mouse head that looked old, dirty, and damaged around the eyes. They didn't look around. They didn't talk to neighbors. They unlocked Claudia's door like they belonged there. Fear started to sink in at that moment, not sharp, but heavy. My chest felt tight as I watched them carry bags, boxes, and instruments inside. Drums, metal objects, large wrapped items I couldn't identify. That night, the sound started. Low drums, slow and repetitive, vibrating through the walls. It went on for hours without stopping, and I couldn't sleep because it felt intentional, like it was meant to be heard. Before the night I saw them in the yard, there was a stretch of evenings where the music changed. It became slower, deeper, and more deliberate. I stopped turning on my TV because it made me miss sounds I needed to hear. That night, I stepped into my yard and stood still, listening. The air felt heavy, not because of temperature, but because everything around me was quiet, except their drums. I moved to the fence and found a narrow gap between boards. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking as I leaned in to look. I told myself to remember details, to stay focused, and to stay quiet. They were gathered in a circle around a small fire. The masks looked worse in the firelight, distorted and lifeless. One of them dragged something across the ground toward a hole that had already been dug. The shape under the cloth was unmistakable, human-sized, limp. They started lowering it into the ground with care, like they were following instructions. The moment before they stopped felt endless. My breath caught in my throat and my legs felt weak. Then everything froze. The one in the Mickey mask slowly turned its head and leaned forward until its face lined up with mine through the fence. We stared at each other in complete silence. I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my front door. My hands slipped on the handle before I managed to get inside and lock it behind me. The street outside was silent and the drums had stopped. I rushed down the hallway toward my bedroom to grab my phone, already planning what I would say to the police. The light switch didn't work, and the darkness felt deliberate. Someone was sitting on the edge of my bed. They didn't move or speak. The mask hid everything except the shape of their head. I stepped back slowly, my breathing loud in my ears, my legs shaking, but still working. When I turned toward the living room, another figure sat in my chair, facing me. Different mask, same stillness. They were blocking every path out. Panic took over completely. I ran for the front door, unlocked it, and burst outside without looking back. Across the street, under the streetlight, Mickey stood waiting. He held a knife in his hand, and dark stains covered the blade. He didn't raise it or step forward. None of them followed me. They just watched. I didn't sleep at all that night. When I finally called the police in the morning, my voice sounded wrong, even to me. They searched both houses and found nothing. No people, no masks, no signs of digging. A few days later, the group returned as if nothing had happened. They stood outside their house sometimes, watching me leave and watching me come back. Every encounter started with a pause where nothing happened, and I waited for it to get worse. They never needed to touch me again. Claudia's case slowly faded into paperwork and silence. Voluntary disappearance. No evidence. No closure. I still live on Alder Street. I don't help anyone anymore. I don't look through fences. I don't open my curtains at night. They still live there. Sometimes they stand outside, completely still, facing my house.